All right, so picking up where we kind of left off about utilitarianism here. So again, kind of a blending of both hedonism and consequentialism. Okay, so the focus on pain and pleasure, and also the focus on the consequences of actions in relation to that pain and pleasure. I'm just going to see if this helps. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Sorry, excuse me. All right. And so now the question becomes, right, and this is where utilitarianism, has the focus and has the recognition on consequences and pain and pleasure. So to again kind of get us familiar with kind of utilitarian frameworks on how to address certain questions, I'm going to read you a scenario. And I usually read this scenario in class, and it usually gives kind of a pretty good gateway to have a nice discussion here. Okay? All right. I'm going to make a couple of changes just to make it a little bit more relevant, a little more timely here. But here we go. Are you a utilitarian? To find out, consider the following scenario. After years of research, a medical scientist, Dr. X, sounds pretty nefarious, realizes that she is just one step away from developing a cure for all known forms of, it says heart disease, but I'm going to change it to COVID-19 because it makes a lot of sense to do so. Okay? It's very timely. Dr. X realizes she is just one step away from developing a cure for all known forms and complications associated with COVID-19. Such a breakthrough would save hundreds of thousands of lives, perhaps millions. We would get back to normal. We wouldn't have to do online education. We wouldn't, have to wear masks in public. All of our frustrations and all of the lives that have been lost and all of the lives that will continue to be lost of COVID-19 and due to COVID-19, right, will be eradicated by Dr. X's cure. Okay? The world could finally be rid of COVID-19. That one last step in her research, okay, and so such a breakthrough, right, would save hundreds of thousands of lives, and it would allow us to return to life as we know it. I just got done reading a couple of stories. I'm recording this video actually in August before the semester begins, but I just read a couple of stories how the Pac-12 just canceled football, and the Big Ten just canceled football, the Big Sky canceled football. So if Dr. X's cure goes through, football, okay, all of these things, okay, such a breakthrough would save hundreds of thousands of lives, perhaps millions, and it would allow us to return to life as normal. One last step in her research is needed, however. And it's technically feasible, but it's morally problematic. It involves the killing of a single healthy human being to microscopically examine the person's, it says heart tissue, but I'm going to change it to lung tissue just seconds after the heart stops beating and the lungs stop breathing. The crucial piece of information is needed to perfect the cure can only be acquired as just described. It cannot be extracted from the lungs of a cadaver, an accident victim, or someone suffering from a disease, or a person who has been dead for more than 60 seconds. Dr. X decides that the benefits to humanity from a cure are just too great to ignore. She locates a suitable candidate for the operation. A homeless person with no living relatives and no friends, surely someone who would not be missed. Through some elaborate subterfuge, she manages to secretly do what needs to be done, killing the homeless person and successfully performing the operation. She formulates a cure and saves countless of lives, and all of our kind of frustration and all of our lives go back to normal. No one ever discovers how she obtained the last bit of information she needed to devise the cure, and she feels not the slightest guilt for her actions. Did Dr. X do right? Okay. And that scenario, did Dr. X do right? Is what Dr. X did justifiable, morally speaking? Right? The killing of a homeless person with no family and no friends, surely someone who would not be missed. Perfects a cure for COVID-19, saves countless of thousands of lives. All of our lives go back to normal. Is it justified? Is it justified? I mean, we're probably really frustrated by the way of the world right now. It's pretty frustrating that, we're still kind of under the holds of this pandemic. It's kind of frustrating and very sad that millions of people have lost their lives as a result of COVID-19 or complications related to it. It's really frustrating that we don't have college football, because right around this time we'd be having homecoming at the University of Idaho. I mean, if she perfects a cure, a lot more people are going to experience pleasure. A lot more people are going to be living lives that they want to live. It just happens to come at the expenditure of a secret murder that Dr. X performed. But was Dr. X justifiable? Was Dr. X's actions justifiable? If you're a utilitarian, the answer is yeah. The answer is yeah, it was justifiable, right? And this is where we start to get into some of the nuances here and some of, I think, the really challenging aspects of utilitarianism. Because if you're a Kantian, let's just play this card for a second. If you're a Kantian, right, what Dr. X did was absolutely a violation of both formulations of the categorical imperative, right? You have the first formulation of the categorical imperative that states that we can't treat, that we have to think about our actions universally, right? Is what I'm doing and can it be universalized? If all people everywhere at all times did something similar to perfect a cure for a disease, can we really universalize that? No, Kant would say. Secondly, and maybe most importantly or more importantly, Dr. X used that homeless person as a means to an end, right? Dr. X didn't ask for volunteers. Dr. X didn't go, maybe to death row and see if somebody wanted to voluntarily give their life for this experiment, right? She totally exploited this homeless person. Okay, so she also failed the second formulation of the categorical imperative. Okay? So if you're a Kantian, that scenario doesn't hold. But if you're a utilitarian, the action's a little more justified, because if we think about this in kind of a qualitative term, if it's like one life for one life, right? Again, this is where it gets a little uncomfortable. One life for one life. Dr. X kills one person, like she murders the homeless person. But millions of people live and survive and beat COVID-19. Millions of people get to go back to ways of life. The economy recovers, right? And everything kind of starts to go back to normal, and everything gets to be really good, right? Maybe so. Okay? Did Dr. X do right? If you think so, then you may be a utilitarian. A utilitarian is more likely to believe that what Dr. X did was right because it brought about the consequences that were more good than bad. One person died, but countless were saved. Okay? In this example, we get a hint of some of the elements that have made utilitarianism so attractive and controversial for so many. Okay? First, whether or not we agree with the utilitarian view in this case, we can see that it has some plausibility. We tend to think it entirely natural to judge the morality of an action by the effects that it has on people involved. To decide if we do right or wrong, we want to know whether or not the consequences of our actions are good or bad, whether they bring about pleasure or pain, whether they enhance or diminish the welfare of ourselves and others. Second, the utilitarian formula for distinguishing right and wrong actions seems exceptionally straightforward. We simply calculate, which action among several possible actions has the best balance of being good over evil, everyone considered, and act accordingly. Moral choice is apparently reduced to a single moral principle in simple math. Third, At least sometimes we all seem to be utilitarian. We might tell a little white lie because the truth would hurt someone's feeling. We may break a promise because keeping it means more harm than good. We may want a criminal punished not because he or she broke the law, but because the punishment may deter him or her from future crimes. We justify such departures from conventional morality on the grounds that they produce better consequences. Okay? So again, this idea of thinking about kind of terms and things from a consequentialist, from a utilitarian perspective, we do this sometimes quite naturally. We do this almost intuitively, and we see a utilitarian framework. Offered in so many various areas of human existence, right? And I mean, you can think about this in terms of the military, right? The military often uses utilitarian calculus to measure action, right? And we can think about dramatic examples here, but when we think about, World War II and the ending of World War II in 1945, when the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? These bombs are going to cause massive destruction. They're going to, kill a lot of people, right? They're going to cause a lot of pain, but they're going to allow us to kind of continue to live our life. They're going to bring about a close to the war, right? And this is going to outweigh the dropping of this bomb, right? Our way of life, protection on the home front, safety on the home front, right? Freedom on the home front, right? All of these values and all of this life that we continue to live comes at the expenditure of dropping these bombs, of making these calculated decisions from a very utilitarian framework as it relates to the dropping of those bombs. Right? We can also see this as it relates to business, right? When we think about kind of production, when we think about kind of production of products, right? The fact that, right, we want to produce kind of cheap products to maximize profit, right? What's going to bring about the most profit as it relates to that which costs to make a certain product. It's a very kind of utilitarian framework. Okay? And so, as strange and kind of like maybe uncomfortable some of these problems with utilitarianism are, it's a really, really plausible and often implemented theory, even in 2020. Okay? So I'm going to pause here, and in the next video on Friday, we're going to kind of like see a little bit more of the concrete nature of utilitarianism, a little bit more of kind of it as a philosophy, its creed, if it were, and kind of relate it back to some of these examples. Okay? All right. We'll also look at some counterexamples. See ya.